Okay, folks, here we go. What we're going to be doing today is exploring, explaining, and analyzing comics and animation in relation to the world of 20th century fine art. And this first of the videos that you're watching is going to be our intro. And to start off, here we have a list of some of the names that I'm going to be mentioning, which any of these can be used as your subject of your post-topic analyses if you are so inclined. And in any event, when you're watching this, please take notes, ask questions, make comments, write them all down, because although this isn't the ideal interactive format, this will be a way for you to get participation credit for this class. Okay, and we're just going to, since we're just about at the end here, we're going to bring it around to the beginning. The very first person that we zoomed in on to focus was Winsor McCay, and certainly he had his relationship to fine art and surrealism. We touched on that, and now this time we're going to explore more in depth. Okay, and the way we're going to start out is how do we define comics? Okay, now obviously you can go to the dictionary, you can go to the Google, and you can say, why even bother? It's like, I know it when I see it. I know what comics are. And you'll find that people vary in their definitions. And for me, I defined comics in the sense that it's the experience that I have when I read what I consider comics. And that's where we're going to start off. And this particular talk was inspired by two things, both happening in 2020. The first was specifically this book. This is a book by Paul Toomey, who is reading it right here, Screwball, which is connected with surrealism. And the other is the Eisner Awards. This was actually one of the books that we nominated when I was one of the judges at the 2020 Eisner Awards. And we've discussed this here and there. You've already heard about the Oscars of the comics industry, that sort of thing. And we've talked about how back in in recent times, what we're having going on here is for the past 2.5 years now, starting around the pandemic, we've had this wave of censorship, this wave of killing, certainly literature in general, and specifically graphic novels being banned in schools, starting with the early 2020 incident with Art Spiegelman's Mouse, and the year that I was the judge, this was part of what was coming up, and it turns out that this is one of the books that we nominated, I'm very happy to say, Jerry Craft's book. And again, I mentioned Jerry Craft. And but to give you a little review of the sensibilities that are going into the decision-making process with the Eisner Awards, it's now standard to have 6 judges from all various aspects of the comics industry, because the Eisners are the comics industry awards, to pick out the nominees. And over here you can see Martha, who's a librarian, and Jamie, who maintains an online archive of panels at comics conventions that go way back. And Alex there, he's a comics creator, he's a writer. And Simon, there's always a Comic-Con representative as part of the team. And Simon also has a podcast and a blog. And then we get down to Laura, who's a comic book store owner. And here you can see list me as an academic. And, from the first time in my first class, I said, yeah, I play one for 3 hours a week in front of you. But, really, it's more that my approach is reporter, journalist, historian, that sort of thing. But that's one of the categories that they like to pin. So, all right, I'm the academic. And the reason that I'm talking about these people in specific is because I want to show you how different things can be with each year, how important a factor it is on who gets chosen as judges. Okay, so, and in this case, one of the factors that we managed uh, to happily do, again, without any sort of agenda, is for the first time since the Eisners have been going on for 30 whatever years, in the nominations, the women were in the majority. The names of women outnumbered the men. And another thing is that in terms of the majority, in terms of publishers, this was this was very atypical in that Marvel and DC was not one of the top couple of publishers. In fact, the top publisher here, IDW, here's a sample of some of the books that were part of the 15 nominees that IDW got. And as you can see, in terms of representation by superheroes, we have Stan's Usagi Yojimbo there, which is about the closest that we get there to it. And then, so there are the 30 something different categories, okay? And so, just to take a particular category as an example, in terms of differentiation, again, 2020 here, we got these are the best comic related books that we picked out. These were your choices of 6. So we got the Screwball that we already hit on, and basically humor comics in the 20s and 30s, the 20s being around the time that surrealism really started blasting off. And then Weirdo, which was a book about underground comics of the late 1960s and into the 70s. And then there's a Ryan Hughes book on basically on the graphic design of comics, and another one on the artwork of James Stokoe, a Canadian comic book artist that I'd actually never heard of before. And it turns out he was the artist that had the most nominations, uh, and which was, I thought, how wonderful, the not your common name. And then we have the Patrick McDonnell Mutt's quarter century collection, his newspaper comic strip, and Linda Barry's fully illustrated hand-drawn book on creative ways to create comics. Okay, so there's best comic related books 2020. Then we go to the most recent one, which this is the one that our last guest speaker, Jessica, talked about when she was judging in 2022. So yeah, her lineup, best comics related. Again, it's her and 5 other people. And so the way this fell down was, okay, here are the nominees. There's a book about Marvel Comics, and there's a book about Marvel Comics Stan Lee, and there's a book about Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and there's a book about Jack Kirby, and what's this? A 5th one, 100-year history of Thai comics. So, anyway, so you can see how it varies depending on you got this sensibility, you've got this mindset. Our particular group, wasn't particularly enamored in staying focused on a particular genre. It was more wide open to alternatives and independence and the rest of it. And in terms of how somebody can make a difference in particular, these are a couple of books that I brought to the table. This is actually ABC of Typography was an English translation of a book that was originally published in France. Okay, and I introduced this to get nominated, and it did. And it's just about a dozen European artists with these different visual approaches. Each one, you can see the diversity there, to the history of lettering and typography. Okay, so this is this is the first, maybe the last time, they'll have a graphic designer such as myself going and helping to pick out books. But I was pleased with that, and the more important thing is that the other judges were as well. And here's the one I mentioned before, Ryan's book. This is enormous. It's almost 600 pages, and it's really a shame that more graphic designers don't know about it, because it not only is profusely illustrated on most all of those pages, but it also talks about the process, the thinking that goes into it, and just really really wonderful in textbook terms, as well as just be gorgeous to look at. And then to get back to the surrealism aspect of it, one of the things I was doing as I was reviewing the nominees with the perspective of putting together focus on fine art leading up to surrealism, I started noticing that it wasn't just screwball. There were more books about surrealism. Like, for instance, this was a graphic novel adaptation of a screenplay for a movie that never got made. Again, these are books that happened to be released in 2019 that we kicked around ideas. Everybody brought their proposals, like, yeah, look at this book. And I wasn't consciously thinking about surrealism. However, when I get to Fantomas, it's like I recognize that name because that was a serialized movie back in the silent movie days about this villain. And again, it's also around the surrealist days. So, we're talking about 1920s, very popular among them. And we're going to touch on that when we get to Magritte later on. Okay, so surrealism. So in terms of why are we talking about what comics are? Because everybody knows what comics are. No, actually, if you get into nerddom, there are some. I heard from another judge in 2021 that one of his co-judges had an extremely strict rule about what comics are. And we're talking the panels, we're talking about the balloons and that sort of thing, but we are, from my standpoint, I like to enjoy comics enough that I will go and decide that things are comics, even if practically nobody else thinks that, because I just enjoy reading them. And so, and here we have, again, sticking with the Eisner Awards, we have the one of the two people that we nominated to the Eisner Award Hall of Fame, which we talked about her before, Nell Brinkley. And here you can take a look at the top of the evolution of her style over 30-something years. She goes, back in the earliest days of the 20th century. She's doing these Nouveau era filigrees and just gradually evolves into this deco sleekness. And it's, again, began with a one illustration per strip story that was told in weekly installments. And then she got into caption narratives, and she got into montage narratives. And even like you look at the second row, she could be very freeform with her stories, or she can just do basically what you can read as a two-panel comic, the dream and the reality. There it is. And for me, I didn't have any problem at all with, with captions, with no word balloons, all that stuff. Because when I was a kid, 3 and 4 years old in the early 1950s, I'd be reading such Sunday comic supplements as Hal Forster's Prince Valiant, and that's just the way it was. But there was actually some battles when it came to what has been accepted in the past as a graphic novel in terms of what qualifies for an Eisner Award nomination. These were a couple that was a struggle, particularly Life on the Moon. Here was a matter of the pushback was, I'm sorry, no, this is a illustrated children's book. Does not qualify as a graphic novel. And anyway, with a lot of back and forth, we finally were able to come to an agreement with the people in charge of the Eisners that it did in fact qualify for a nomination. However, I wasn't always that successful. In this particular case, this was a particular frustration for me because these books, again, all these books, if you're looking for them, all published in 2019. We were judging that whole year. This one was one that I just thought was so superb. And again, there was, that's not, but it is the way I look at it. It's one of those things where there are illustrations on every page. It's telling the story of Elvis in a way that I've never seen it, which is visually delightful and creative. And anyway, here's a sample of those pages. And yeah, I'm still pissed off that didn't make it in to be nominated. But anyway, okay, so just a quick back up a little bit here. One of the things we can talk about are what aren't comics. And for me, storyboards are not comics. I mean, you can look at storyboards that have people walking around and talking with each other. And it's like, yeah, okay, it looks like you can just add the word balloons. But, for all sorts of various reasons, storyboards are not comics. And if you're interested in reading more about that, these are, if you go, you can look this up online. These are interviews that I did with a couple of comics artists who are also storyboard artists, and they talk about the difference. And so there you have storyboards. Okay, storyboards are for making films, and there are all sorts of factors that go into consideration for a good storyboard. But the one thing about films, and I'm talking about live action and animation, is that they started out as comics when they were originally being invented. And by this, we're talking about the phenogistoscope. And let's see, this is supposed to take off. Maybe it's taking a little time to get warmed up before it starts rolling. Anyway, I'll talk about this a little bit. Basically, it was a series of still images that was made to create an animated image, to create the illusion of movement. Still not starting up. Okay, I'm going to hit the progress bar and see if that makes a difference. Come on. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I see the spinning ball. Okay, all right, so now we're going to back up and let's try that again. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Inspired by Faraday's wheel,
Joseph Plateau in Brussels invents the phenogistoscope in 1832.
This disc demonstrates continuous movement for the first time.
In 1833, Horner invented the dada, later called the zoetrope, or wheel of life. Here, the phases of movement are also seen in the form of an infinite loop through the slits.
We see an image,
then no image, and then a slightly different second image, producing the illusion of movement in the mind of the viewer. In 1877, Émile Reynaud built his praxinoscope.
We see the images in the mirrors.
We see the images in the mirrors.
The function of the dark phase between
the slits is taken over by the angle at which the mirrors are set up.
Yeah, so the difference basically between the zoetrope and the starter, the phenogistoscope, is that it works on the same principles, but whereas the just the scope can only be viewed by one person. The zoetrope allowed for group viewing. And then the next progression there, Charles Emile Reynaud, the Englishman, was able to use mirrors to create his effect. And the progress here was that with the praxinoscope, that he was able to come up with the projection praxinoscope, okay, an optical toy that he invented that allows the images to be projected on the screen. And hey, moving pictures, right? All right, so here, which of course, right around that same era, is what's happening. The governor of California, Leland Stanford, for whom Stanford University is named after, wanted to win a bet, 25 grand, big money those days, that a trotting horse lifted all four hooves off the ground simultaneously when it ran. So he brought in Muybridge, and most everybody knows the story. Muybridge hooked up the battery of 24 cameras aimed at the trotting horse with rapid drop shutters connected to wires, and was able to capture the horse's movement in time and space, and innovating motion picture photography in the process. And yeah, just look up to that first row. So Stanford managed to win his bet, and so we have, how does this relate to comics and animation? Well, we have Fumetti, right? We have photocomics, which we talked about when we showed when we talked about Harvey Kurtzman, and even to stick with the history, like even further back, we're going to talk about Max Gaines, who was able to, in terms of his importance, he was able to come up with basically the first like 4-color saddle stitch newsprint pamphlet that really was the precursor to what's now become the standard of comic book. And he was also co-publisher of a publication that was introducing superheroes like Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, and that sort of thing. And he was the one who went on to found Educational Comics EC, which we talked about with Josh and Tommy. And so he wrote one of the earliest essays on comic books. This is 1942, just a couple of years after the what's considered the creation of comic books with the action heroes. And the title of this story of comics is Narrative Illustration. So, and you know what? I really like that as a definition of comics. And we're going to get back to that in a bit. But he basically started out with the cave paintings. Here we have the example of the Chauvet caves, and if you notice this particular still that I chose, you can see how the animals have these multiple limbs, heads, and tails. And the reason I'm showing that is there's been a new study in cave art in various places in France, where they noticed that when they would go into these dark caves and they would be carrying flickering with torchlight, and the flames, as they would pass over the paintings of these animals, it actually gave the impression that the images were moving across cave walls. And so now they're saying, you know what, maybe these paintings are also in addition to telling stories in still pictures, they're also attempts at creating animation, brief though it may be. Okay, so, and I like to think of I usually say the first comic I ever read, I was 2 years old, and I read it every Sunday when I went to St. Fidelis Church in New York. And I was taken to looking up at the story that was being told in the stained glass through the Sunday morning 10 a.m. mass lights. and which also served me well in terms of preparing me for reading backlit comics on my iPad. Never had any problem with that transition. And so, yeah, here we have another thing that was happening in New York back in my that I remember vividly back in my younger days. This is the series of 7 tapestries, and we're talking about, going back to the late 1400s, early 1500s, kind of a classic tale of the noblemen and hunters that would go in pursuit of a unicorn. And so it was, a pretty common tale back in, late medieval and Renaissance times, in literature as well as art. And so, for me, it's like I'm looking at this and, I'm seeing the story. Okay. It's, silent comics, comics without words. That's definitely a thing. These comics just happen to, to be like, 2 and 3 times the size of actual people, and they were woven out of silk and woolen threads. So, and here you see the unicorn being attacked and defending himself and being captured and taken captive, all these sort of things. So that's the kind of it. At this point, we would take a minute or however many minutes to talk about, to get some feedback from you. Like, what questions do you have? Do you disagree with me? What other thoughts has all this brought about? Okay, and so yeah, a panel discussion on what makes up the panels of comics. And so, although this format we can't do it in, you are of course taking notes, and so you can deal with your take on what you think comics should be as part of your post-topic analysis or your or participation Q&A. Okay, so now we're going to push on to, hey, comics are all about kids, right? Uh, hey kids, Bazoom, it's pow bang. Back in the early day, again, this okay, Viewmaster reels. They were basically these plastic binocular looking things that you would hold up to light, again with the backlit, right? Again with the stained glass. So and they were originally introduced in 1939 at the New York's World Fair, New York's World Fair. And, it started out as being, just kind of generic scenery pictures that were coming across in a 3D form. Uh, and you can see what lower right, what Beatles strip looked like without the both eyes. And so they were pretty much, kind of generic. Well, they were vacation pictures kind of thing. It's basically you were able to, oh, look, we can watch slides without having to go to a lot of trouble of setting up a carousel tray. So, and the basic idea is you plop the cardboard disc, it was called a reel, in it with these transparencies, and you can see the images as you go clicking through. Got very popular around the 1960s. Again, my youth, and really took off once they started licensing the properties, such as you can see, Disney and whatnot. And they were telling a story, right? Basically, the story that may have just been where the original images were taken from and made into, gone through the 3D process. And a lot of times there were texts to accompany the images. Sometimes it'd be descriptions, sometimes they'd be dialogue. But, there's your story. Okay, there's your narrative. So let's see how far we can push this. Let's take board games, all right? So again, spending some time in my childhood here, Chutes and Ladders, but which we can actually push back into ancient India, when it was, what you're seeing in the upper left there is a board version of a game of Wisdom, which yeah, it was popular. It was played for entertainment, but it was also telling a story. It was a way to instruct uh, people about morality. It's a religious approach. And the central concept of the game, with all these panels, uh, starting from lower left, is to go through the squares and be able to, liberate yourself from all these earthly passions that you're feeling, all this bondage that is keeping you from um, attaining higher levels of spiritual enlightenment. So basically that's part of the game, and you can see how it evolved, got very popular in the UK around yeah, 1895. That's about right. And in terms of formats, like where is it starting? Starting at the lower. Well, that's not the way we. Well, the thing is, if you remember back to when I did my anarchy talk, it was back in the good old days, in that turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s, when those first Sunday strips were coming out. There were no rules. There was no how to lay out comics the 9-panel grid way. They were able to have all sorts of fun exploring all sorts of ideas. And I'll tell you how far it went too when you take a look at this. Uh, this is an example from 1917. This was a group of staff artists at the Chicago Tribune, including Frank King, who did the Gasoline Alley, created the Gasoline Alley strip. And he came up with a bunch of others. You can see their names there for what they called Crazy Quilt. And it was basically a jam. It was like Sunday panels and strips that was, it was actually designed to resemble a crazy quilt, which was back then a popular art form. And you can see how it's there's a ladder. It's snaking all over the page, zigzagging and clashing. All these different artists are disrupting the other's work, and they're even making comments on it. And basically, they are unhinging the fourth wall, right? Or I guess what you'd call on a printed page the second wall. But it also has attributes of a Cubist painting, and we're going to get back to Cubism in the first of two shows we're going to be talking about. But meanwhile, contemporarily, we have the incredible Art Spiegelman, who has created this strip that goes back to his earlier days. And it's one of those things where if you're a designer and you appreciate the visual and you limit yourself to just looking at what Art was doing in terms of his graphic novel, you are missing out on a tremendous amount of not only comics history education, but also a tremendous amount of experimentation that he was doing. So I'm holding this up here for a second because it's one of those things where you can you can read this comic in a variety of ways. You can read it by following the yellow arrows, or you can read it by, you know what? I don't have to just listen to Art and pay attention to it. I'm going to read this in all sorts of ways. And it's so magnificently constructed for that. So, and which gets into, now this is Understanding Comics. This is the book, the Scott McCloud book that was like the starter kit for everybody, taking a more of a casual, non-scholarly approach to what comics are all about. It was very popular in all sorts. I mean, it still is being taught used in design classes. And so so here we have Scott talking about how okay, this is his definition. It's comics are stories that are intended to convey information and produce a response. That's how one of the ways that he defined it. So with that definition, he can fit in photo comics, stained glass windows, a series of impressionist paintings, instruction manuals, right? We got, our IKEA, and we've got our airline safety that I added. But, that presents some interesting obstacles here when he says he defines this as being intended uh, to convey. It's like, who cares what the artist's original intention was? And who's even to say what, say, Monet's intentions were when he did it? And also there's the whole factor of deliberate sequence, right? Okay, which really, for me, it's like, who cares whether it's deliberate? I want the audience, the reader, to have as much autonomy as possible. And if that autonomy involves coming up with their own story, their own images, then that are narrative, then I have no problem with that. So, but he's stuck on, he decides to limit comics to sequential art, images in sequence, which he has now just wiped out all of the comics that are single panel comics, right? Which is weird that he chose a Bill Keane Family Circus comic, because if there was anything that represents my definition of narrative illustration, it's been Bill Keane's narrative illustration. Here's the, those of you who are familiar with this. This is a single panel, but it is telling a story by way of dotted lines. And also this just came out a couple of days ago, a political cartoon, which is like, okay, it can't have a single panel, so it's a political cartoon. It's not comics. And just to stick in this, well, it is, and just to stick in the whole idea of kid stuff, we can travel back to Victorian England during the last third, say, of the 19th century, where we are going to look at just quickly at the three most influential, the three most popular, the three most well-respected British children's book illustrators at that time, Kate Walter and Randolph. And this is one of those things. When I was teaching design, it was like, oh man, I got to teach the art during Queen Victoria's era. Well, I don't like any of that stuff, but luckily I was able to find these folks what their contribution was. They were expanding what children's book illustration could be. I mean, back before then, just take a look in over in the lower right, the children's book illustrations, cut and dry. They were illustrated lessons. They were teaching a moral. It was like, here's the picture. Here's what you have to learn in order to be a good person in Victorian England. Well, you know what? Children's books, common enough realization now, can actually also be used to entertain. And that's what they started doing. That's why what we have with Kate Greenaway. It's like, okay, teaching the alphabet. Yeah, telling a story too. Children's book illustrator, just very, very famous. And still there's, her books are all in print. And she paved the way to someone we talked about before when we were talking about the pioneering women in comics. We have Grace Drayton, who around 1910, she was not only one of the first female cartoonists, but she was also one of the most fabulously successful. Okay, and and now we have Walter Crane, who, in addition to being a children's book illustrator, he was also a key part, one of the top guys of the arts and crafts movement. Around heading towards that turn of the century, which was a pushback basically against all the crap that was being designed during the Industrial Revolution. So, yeah, basically, if you don't know about British arts and crafts, basically these are young artists and craftsmen. The figurehead, led by a guy named William Morris, okay? And they all banded together, and what they were deciding was that, you know what? The design arts are being ignored, and we're going to take the complete opposite route. We are needing to elevate design the to its rightful place besides painting and sculpture. Their declaration was all forms of visual expression deserve the status of art. Okay, yeah, you're a painter, you're Raphael, you're doing these great canvases, but you know what? The just as important are the tradesmen, the designers of wallpaper, say. I mean, it doesn't mention comics artists, but you know, the idea is the same principle. You know that it could. Okay, and in fact, you can even see in the lower left there, you've got a sequence, a 4-panel, just basically a 4-panel comic stuck within the alphabet book. And then Randolph Caldecott, who is important in all sorts of ways. In the 1870s and 80s, he was the guy who coined the phrase picture books to describe the children's books he created. And he was the first to put pictures on every page and make the images as integral to the story as the text. Okay, that's another factor. You know, if there's that play between words and image, you know, then you've got the narrative going on. And he was also someone who had a just fun sense of the absurd, and you know, you can see in his ability to anthropomorphize inanimate objects and give animals human qualities. You know, he would exaggerate the movements and the facial expressions of the people and the animals, and really brought the work to life. And of course, you know, he pretty much his humorous drawing style not only became a prototype for children's books. Some of you familiar enough with with children's books know about the Caldecott Award, the most prestigious exclusive award that a children's book can get. But you know, his dancing dinnerware that you see here, you know, it's also got a rhythm about it, right? This is coming alive to, you know, pretty much a musical rhythm. You can hear the cat and the fiddle, right? And the dancing going on there. So you know what? He was also setting up a prototype for what started out the first decades of American animation, in terms of basically doing the same thing there. And so to take one more before we get to fine art. We are oh yes, also this is again where we talk about, okay, let's debate Boff Bam Pow. Are comics not just for kids anymore, and in what ways, that sort of thing. So again, please make your notes and participate by asking questions, and we'll continue the conversation and give me your counter opinions. So the last thing I'm going to do here before we get into the fine art aspect is talk about graphic design as comics, because when I created this course for Art Center, it was like I just didn't want a history of comics and animation. I needed the word design history to precede it. Okay, because for me, as far as I'm concerned, you may be picking up on that already. It's like the graphic comics are graphic design, and so much of graphic design is comics. Like, for example, maps are information design, right? And here is E. Sims Campbell, who is the second guy, the second person, I should say, with Kate, who we were able to give a Judge's Choice Hall of Fame honoring during my year as the as an Eisner judge, and this particular work that he did, it's basically at the time the neighborhood of Harlem was in so many ways a cultural capital of Black America, and it was just really at its peak in terms of being a vibrant community for writers, artists, musicians. Okay, this is the spread of jazz. With the speakeasies and the jazz clubs, and it's a whimsical illustration. He's a comics artist, he's a cartoonist, but it was also getting into other issues like the complex racial dynamics that were going on in Harlem. In addition to capturing it's like the boundless vitality of Harlem at the height of its popularity. Uh, and so, and the reason his name came up when we were talking about, I hadn't even thought of Campbell in terms of being a possible nominee for the Hall of Fame, but I was listening to somebody else talk about, well, there's this Playboy cartoonist that I like, that I really find very funny, and I think, and as soon as he said, okay, magazine cartoonist, bam, comics, and so. Here we have E. Sims Campbell, one of the most successful African American illustrators, and also indispensable as part of the birth of Esquire magazine back in the early 1930s. He actually created the original Esky character, and he just made, he was one of the key factors in making Esquire the success that it immediately became with his covers and full page cartoons, and it just catapulted the circulation from the beginning. So I remembered this story I had written about whatever it was 5 years ago, in which I talk all about the wonderful stuff that he did back in those spreads, and the stories that he would tell. And oh, there he is. This is actually back then, in those days. Comics artists had enough status that they would actually be spokespeople for beer, as you saw. And so here in my article, which again you can find on the internet, to take more of a close look at, or you can just Google it, the Cotton Club, and there are little stories being told here, like look, lower right. And you see this is where the place, like so many of the establishments in Harlem back then, they were segregated and they were owned by whites, yet the entertainment was people like Cab Calloway. And the people from downtown would like to, drive up in their whatever top hats and minks. You can see lower right, getting out to be entertained with Cab Calloway's jazz, and various types of clubs. And this whole map is giving you the skinny on, okay, there are smaller clubs that are open to both races. And of course, there were ones that were owned by blacks and would cater to them as well. But you could pick up on all that stuff. But it was also a time when the map was showing blacks and whites drinking together, dancing together. And this is early 1930s. We're talking about a time when segregation was pretty much dominating most of the nation, both in legal terms and in societal terms. And and here's another little fun ad that Campbell put up there. You go up to across the street from the Savoy Ballroom, and at the top there, across Lenox Avenue, you can see marijuana cigarettes, 2 for $0.25. And he again just it was a fun time. It's a chaotic time. It was rough, a lot of mayhem going on, that sort of thing. But again, it's like the more you look at him, the more you go, of course he deserves an honored place in the Eisner Hall of Fame. And I'm so glad that that happened. There was Esky that he did. So yeah, he did covers. Anyway, there's a lot more illustrations there. But to get back to the just to show another example of another map that he did back. We already mentioned the '39 New York World's Fair with the ViewMaster. This is his comic map again, fabulously detailed about the fair, and so much of it is satire of like modern art and technology, poking fun of the displays and the entertainments and the spectacles. And he included captions. He would actually include quotes as well from some of the characters that are depicted. He was having fun, and of course, dance has to come into it. Showgirls, and we got the Savoy towards center. The jazz clubs. So again, just absolutely wonderful. So, and to get into more traditional, what we think of when we think of graphic design, say, well, specifically Deco design in the 1920s and 30s, the interwar years. Of course, the name Cassandra pops up because at that time he was the most well-known among the tons of designers that are working in Paris. And this particular ad that he did, ad campaign really, was the most well-known among the French. It's just like everybody knew this. It was also pretty much his most witty um, advertisement / comic strip. This was a comic strip when it was self-contained on one poster, or it also had the strategic advantage of taking advantage of the fact that there was a lot more mobility going on in the city. People were walking around, people were driving around, people were looking at ads on the move, and they needed to be told visually quickly what the message was. And so you had in a situation with the Dubonnet posters where they would be printed, those 3 panels would be printed separately. And so you'd be walking down the street, and if you were going in the right direction, you would actually have the story being told to you as you would when you were reading a 3-page strip in the newspaper. So, and here we have, he created this trademark of a cartoon man for Dubonnet. And there, again, the simplicity, the whole idea of Art Deco being so much about geometry. You can see how that the bottom of the wine glass that he's looking at directly there actually repeats the shape of the hat. And then the slogan itself, the 3-panel slogan / caption is a pun, okay? And starting out with Dubois, it's like, you can see his face. Yeah, doubtful, suspicious. This is a new product. I don't know about this one. So you can see the little uncertainty in that circle that is his eye. But then there's an attraction to it that's going to grow throughout the panels with the color gradation. So it's like, Dubon. Oh, this is good. This is a tasting very tasty beverage, and eyeball rolling back in his head, and yeah, it's also could be film frames as well. But the thing is, then you turn around the corner and you see the 3rd poster, and here it is, Dubonnet. The product is identified, and the glass is refilled. Think I'll have another. There's the full word, and there's the contented body. Nice and relaxed. I'm going to have another, and you can see again graphically, Deco, the arms are serving as an arrow to the product, right? And this was also picked up and popular over in the United States with the famous Paul Rand, most known for his ABC TV logo that's lasted a gazillion years. And he was also into visual puns. He was picking up on what Cassandra was doing, like say with his brandy ad. We're taking the same concept of the waiter's head is a brandy snifter, and the background dot patterns are meant to suggest carbonated bubbles. But Paul Rand did a lot of stuff in a playful way. As serious as he was, and as strictly modernist as his simple designs were, he also had an element of play about him, especially in the early years, in the 30s and 40s when he was just starting out, and here even into the 50s. So much of his design was based on that play principle. And so, here what he's doing is he's humanizing cigars, right? And basically it's a cat. You can take a look at the New Yorker cartoon in the upper left, which pretty much even Charles's lion looks similar to um, Paul's. And yeah, he's so what he's doing is he's not just trying to convert brands. Here he's attracting non-smokers to the cigar and to the series, because it was a whole series that he would come up with of single panel cartoons, aka comics. And one of the things that you can credit and or blame Paul Rand for this particular campaign actually was able to dramatically increase the amount of women who were smoking cigars. Okay, so and again, to pop back to children's books, this is one that he wrote with his wife. And you can see that it's, even if it's a single panel, it can have movement in it. It can be telling a story. In this case, the story was listen. And another thing, you can consider a 3-panel comic, or you can just consider it a rebus. Okay, IBM. And so now to switch over in similar territory to Milton Glaser and his iconic turning things around for people who were having difficult time living in New York during the early 1970s. This campaign was very successful in terms of doing this paper. I left I left New York grew up in New York and left it in 1974. So anyway, I'm sure I'd stick around if I saw Milton's campaign. It is basically the 3 panels here are a word, an image, and an abbreviation symbolic of a city. Okay, so it's interactive, which is a great way. Interactivity, that's the way, this is the way comics should be. You don't just read it like you're, reading storyboards for a movie. And with Milton, who you can probably get the feel from the psychedelic swirls around his ear that an illustrator did, that Milton is also responsible for the Bob Dylan poster. And this was an interview where he was really talking about the importance of comics to his whole generation of designers. And Milton and Seymour Quast were one of the original founders of Pushpin Studios, which was a collective, young New York graphic artist, Ed Surreal, who still works as a just brilliant political cartoonist. Definitely worth checking out. Reynold Ruffins as well. And so, they were sometimes, very literally, as you can see with Seymour telling the story here, sometimes more figuratively giving voice to comics. And so you take here, these are 2 pages from a promotion that Pushpin put out. This was like various illustrators doing a 2-panel cartoons on a theme. This theme was notorious. So basically, what you have here is a silent comedian, Fatty Arbuckle, right? Fatty Arbuckle, the man, panel one, and the legend, panel two. And so yeah, this is comics, right? Agree, disagree, talk, write, make notes. That's fine. Uh, and it's pretty much this was a major sea change because during the first half of the 20th century, the traditional illustration that dominated the popular magazine cover design was for the most part, realistic, sentimental, pretty pedestrian, right? But, here's a time when Norman Rockwell was on his way out as a cover illustrator. We're talking 1950s here, right? And, why was Rockwell uh, no longer that valuable? Um, no, it wasn't computers that put him out of business. It was another electronic device called photography. And that was able to overtake illustration's traditional function. And so it's like, why bother? I mean, even Rockwell was taking photos and then painting them, for his Saturday Evening Post covers. But there was also a more conceptual approach to illustration coming about. I mean, you take a look at Rockwell's puzzlement over the cover in the corner. He's a little bit puzzled by what's going on with his abstract expressionism, huh? And so, for these new young punks that were coming up, Norman Rockwell was the enemy, right? They were interested in showing that they could come up with an attitude. They can come up with illustrations which still made them valuable uh, as a viable market that had more of an immediacy to it, directness, that was actually drawing on the art and design that was going on in Europe over the time, and really this kind of liberation in terms of openness, trying new forms and techniques. Check out Ben Shahn, check out George Gross, and picking up from all these earlier periods and being able to integrate word and image into an entirety in itself. And here's something else I did you can look up online. This is an interview I did with several book and magazine cover designers in which I talk about, well, there's the title, How Comic Books Influence Graphic Design. Seymour talked with me. He's spoken at Art Center, and he is also someone who, in 2010, decided to get into the graphic novel racket. Better late than never. And so these are just a couple of the classics that he adapted. You can also seek out Homer's Odyssey, done around the same time, Twain's Connecticut Yankee. And okay, here's a pause to reflect. Seymour was born in 1931. Seymour is in his 90s. Okay. And he's knocking out, he's doing much better than knocking out graphic novels. He's like the caliber of Eisner nominee persons. So, okay, and we'll go to one other area of graphic design, which is advertising. And in this case, we're going to pick George Lois, who is representative of the creative revolution that was going on, that really heralded the Mad Men era, that whole 1960 through 1970 decade. He was all a part of that. And he basically, Doyle Dane Bernbach were the leaders in the creative revolution in terms of Madison Avenue ad agencies. And Bernbach's philosophy, Bill Bernbach, was that what you needed to do, which is revolutionary from back in the old days of just when you had a copywriter in one part of the ad agency and the artist in the other part of the agency with a copywriter, write the copy, here it is, art director put something together for it. With Bernbach, it was the collaboration, it was that synthesis of the copywriter and the art director. And George Lois, one of the things that helped make his mark is he could be both of those. He was both of those at once. He was able to integrate visual concepts and verbal concepts together. And they were vital to successfully maintaining, conveying his message. And again, like the cigars, he's giving the product a human personality, right? And there's nothing inherently funny about liquor, but again, you keep in mind that the goal of all liquor ads is to order by name. It's like don't just take whatever comes out of the well when you're at the bar. It's like, okay, you got to give personality. So uh, the the Wolfschmidt demographic that they were going after was, the party crowd. So again, 1961. This is typical standard uh, pickup as it's getting towards closing time line. The vodka becomes the seducer, right? And again, this was pretty much, at the style of, it was late 1950s when Jules Feiffer started doing these cartoons. So seeing these free-floating texts pretty much replacing balloons, that was pretty standard at the time. And it was pretty much Pfeiffer style for pretty much all his life. He's still alive. Oh yeah, here's another fact. Okay, so we have we have Seymour. In it going into his he's in his early 90s. Pfeiffer was born in 1929. Okay, and he has been creating graphic novels since 1979. There's this one graphic novel called Monroe that was, which actually goes back even earlier than it's kind of a short enough that I guess you could consider it a graphic novel, more like 1950s. As some of you have found out and become enamored with UPA Studios, uh, so if you seek out a cartoon animation called Monroe, it was based on the 1950s children's book by Pfeiffer, which I don't have the exact date here, but it was animated by one of the great UPA directors, Gene Deitch. So definitely worth looking up there. And so just to get back to Lois for a second, I put a question mark there because George Lois was very famous at claiming that he did designs that he didn't really do. So it's like, okay, maybe he did this. And the interesting thing about this is basically, okay, you've got Pfeiffer in the 50s drawing, this basically same scenario. It's two people in the same place, right? And what are you doing? Interactive as the reader, you are painting the picture, which has all sorts of great aspects. Number one, Coldine doesn't have to pay that much for the ads because they don't have to spring for any photography. And number two, it's like every one of you who looks at this and gets it, gets what's going on. And again, early 1960s, of course, the husband's gonna be the bully. Yeah, get some sleep. I gotta get some. But the thing of it is, you also picture this couple. Each one of you are picturing this couple differently, right? So, and that's part of the magic of what's going on. And it's so simple and it's so direct and yet so creative. And plus, it's like the verbal and the visual elements of this kind of communication. There is, they're there. It's just you're providing the visit, the visual. And it's, it can be like, words and music to a song. You can, it doesn't have to have words. You can sometimes hear them. Okay, one more on George Lois. This was actually a comic, it was kind of a set up punchline cover of Esquire magazine. Yeah, because Esquire in the 1960s, basically, it had gone through some iterations from when Campbell started it, but it was in the 1960s that George Lois really once again put Esquire on the map as it faded away, became irrelevant as a men's magazine when it tried competing against Playboy. And then it went political and did very well for itself. And so, yeah, like basically this one here is the story. There was a story on Hubert Humphrey inside. And so what George Lois decided to do was portray what's basically Humphrey, a way of critiquing Humphrey for defending LBJ's Vietnam War. Okay. And yeah, sometimes, like I say, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes a cover illustration is just a cover illustration, as you can see with the very first cover of the New Yorker magazine back in 25. But then you have incredible talents, incredible designers like Saul Steinberg telling this wonderful story about New Yorkers that read the New Yorker, and done in such detail and done with such kind of free floating. You can experiment, you can walk around. That's part of the whole story. Is again, as we saw with Crazy Quilt, it doesn't have to be strictly linear. And again, if you walked around Manhattan, you know that, yeah, it's a grid, but you don't get around it that way. You can do all these explorations, in this case, all over the world. And it's telling this wonderful story. And now, of course, more with Francois Mouly, Art's wife, directing the covers of the magazine. You have people like the terrific Tom Gold coming in, actually just literally doing a 5-panel comic on the cover that he very skillfully handles there. And interestingly enough, he was influenced by a photographer. In this case, Ouija, the famous photographer Ouija, this incredible, magnificent shot that he took back in 1940. And it was like, okay, that was, and you can pretty much see it. Here's like a day in the life of a beach. And Tom Gold was also, or has also been influenced by another New Yorker cartoonist, W. Heath Robinson, who I want you to take note of his name, because we are getting, and this again is from the first year of the New Yorker. So it's not the New Yorker from the very beginning. They didn't just run single panel cartoons. Here we have 3 panels done in this same format. And when we get into Rube Goldberg, I want you to think back on Heath Robinson and maybe do some research on him. Okay. All right. Now we're going to take a pause to change videos, go on to part 2, and see you on the other end. Bye.